I'm Stephen, your host for today, and I'll be speaking with Professor Mark Templeton. Professor Templeton is a clinical professor of law, director of the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic, and a research affiliate of the Energy Policy Institute at Chicago. After receiving his JD from Yale Law School, Professor Templeton held a number of different positions, including senior advisor to the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, an advisor to the U.S. delegation to the UN Commission on Human Rights, and director of the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. He's here to talk to us about his career path and how he became a University of Chicago professor. Welcome to the course, Professor Templeton.
So I'm a clinical professor of law, as you said, and I direct the Abrams Environmental Law Clinic at the University of Chicago Law School. So basically what a clinical law professor is that you're based at a law school, but you kind of sit between kind of the traditional academics and the real world. So my academic colleagues write law review articles, they write books, they lead seminars or teach traditional podium kinds of classes.
Mm-hmm.
I teach students through the practice of law itself. So very much kind of an apprenticeship model, but it's the apprenticeship model where you're putting students out in front as much as possible, kind of putting them into the role of being a lawyer. And so you give them a lot of intensive kind of feedback on what they're doing. So while some of the discussions that my academic colleagues have may be more theoretical, we are very practical, and we have real world clients that we represent in real world litigation, trying to address real world environmental and energy problems.
All right. Thank you for that explanation. Now, we've been asking people from all sorts of fields, from all over different departments of UChicago about their real world experience. And, so some people have less than others, but looking at your resume, I mean, I don't even know if we have time to cover all of the different positions that you've held, but could you describe, in a succinct way, if possible, what your route was from college to where you are now at UChicago?
Yeah, so I will try to be as succinct as possible, but I think maybe the lesson that comes from this is that there's a lot of serendipity in people's careers, and a lesson that I've learned and I try to share with other people is jump on the opportunities that present themselves at the time when they seem interesting and impactful, and then over a longer series of these positions, you can kind of figure out, oh, this is exactly what I like doing and where I can be effective. And this is where I can, maybe not so much. Coming out of college, I worked in finance. I worked as a junior investment banker at Goldman Sachs. But I'd always been interested in law and politics and policy. And so instead of going to business school, like many people who work on Wall Street, I instead went to law school, devoted most of my time there to learning about international human rights, and then got fellowships after law school, both to live in Southeast Asia for a year and work on human rights issues in Southeast Asia and South Asia, and then a subsequent fellowship to work at the U.S. State Department directly for the Assistant Secretary responsible for human rights issues. After that, there was an administration change, which is an opportunity for those in appointed kinds of positions to look for new opportunities. I then went to McKinsey and Company, both in the San Francisco and DC offices for a couple of years each. Was really interested in kind of the organizational challenges, helping clients, and really interested in kind of nonprofit management and policy issues. So the opportunity came up to go back to my alma mater, Yale Law School, to work on finance and administration issues there and work directly for the dean. So left McKinsey to go back to New Haven. After 4 years there, the opportunity came up to oversee the state environmental department, energy policy, state parks in my home state of Missouri. Then, again, these opportunities come up. Opportunity arose to work on the $20 billion independent trust that BP set up after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And after that, ended up at the University of Chicago doing what I'm doing now. So it's been circuitous in some ways, yet. Each of these opportunities kind of really addressed an interest that I had at the time.
Yeah, and I can see how there are, threads running through a lot of that. Even though if you just kind of pull two lines from your resume out, it might be difficult to tell how they really intersect. But we actually would like to go a little bit further back now and talk about you when you were still a kid. I mean, around the time that you were in like middle school and high school and maybe starting to think about your career in a very broad sense. What did you think you would be? And I mean, looking back, were there indications that you would end up on a path like this?
So I certainly didn't know that this kind of position existed
Yeah.
when I was in middle school or high school. I did think that I wanted to be a professor, though. I really enjoyed school. I enjoyed reading and learning and participating in small group discussions and engaging with my teachers. And so that was always something that was really interesting and attractive to me. Then when I was an undergraduate, I went to I'd say medium-sized institution, and just took me a long time to kind of build those relationships with professors that I had looked for. So it thought, I really want to try the real, I'll say the real world instead of the ivory tower. And it's actually worked out really well because I'm able to kind of take that real world experience across all these different areas of finance and business and nonprofits and government, and kind of bring it to bear to what I'm doing today.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So like I'm curious, I mean, I'm assuming that you had that in the back of your mind maybe when you went to law school, thinking that you would want to teach, but obviously as we just talked about all the different positions you've held, you didn't go straight into teaching. Was there a moment either way back then or maybe recently when you decided that you really did want to go into academia, or when you thought that this is what I want to spend like the bulk of my time doing?
Yeah, so I think that when I went to law school, I was able to develop some really close relationships with professors. There was a professor who headed the International Human Rights Program at Yale Law School. And so I was his research assistant. I took all of his classes. I was the student leader of the International Human Rights Clinic. And kind of had similar relationships with a couple of other professors as well. And so, their mentorship was really important for me in terms of thinking through, oh, okay, again, you can have, one foot in the academy, so to speak, and one foot in the real world. And so, you know, that way, your students are not just getting things out of the books, which is fine, but they're also kind of getting that knowledge which has not yet been put into books or into articles. That's really more cutting edge. But also, people in the real world are sometimes kind of missing that theoretical background that they could really benefit from. So, when you're working with your clients, and you can sort of say, oh yeah, the problem we're facing right now is not just of this moment. It's actually a decades long problem. Here's structural issues. Here's how we should think about tackling it. So again, it was that kind of opportunity in law school, which I think really does allow people to combine the theory and practice that I enjoyed so much.
Yeah, I'm curious what maybe experiences that you've had or skills that you have developed from those experiences you find yourself sort of revisiting and using in the work you do now. I mean, are there ways that those non-academic posts that you've held, and there's quite a few of them, are there ways that those inform what you do today?
Yes, so for example, I draw on my state government experience, having been the top environmental regulator in the state of Missouri, for when I work with students and teach them now about how do we engage with the head of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency or leadership at US EPA, to try to help them understand, okay, here are the, you know, pressures that government officials are facing. Here are the resource constraints that they have. Here's what success is for them. So if you can think about how you help them to be successful, and pitch things in those terms, then you're more likely to be successful as an advocate, right? If you just come
Mhm.
in solely with the perspective of like, this is what my client wants, and you all need to do it, and you needed to do it, yesterday. I mean, that's fine, but that is not, you're missing an important problem of the aspect of the problem solving, and frankly, the interpersonal relations as well. I mean,
Hmm.
so that, I mean, just another dimension of that is that I think people often think of big organizations as like, as monolithic, as having a single mind. But having been in large organizations, right, there are lots of different views on these issues,
Sure.
and so you want to be very careful. You can have people, they may not be allies entirely inside of an organization that you're going up against, but they may also not be as opposed to you as you think they are. And so you want to be careful about, treating each person of those organizations you deal with as an individual person. And
Right.
I think those are some of the kinds of lessons that I bring to students, as well as just, judgment. Where do I think a government official is likely to move on an issue? In what way? Why is that the case? And things like that. So I guess I would say there's a lot. There are basic skills that we work on too, in terms of how to communicate effectively, how to write well. But there's definitely a strong aspect of strategy and judgment that I try to relay as well.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I see. What you there has been an emphasis on human rights throughout your career, and I think even in your studies, if I heard you correctly, you are now practicing and teaching about environmental law. I'm curious what drew you to sort of human rights as a subject matter initially, and yeah, I'm curious to hear about the evolution, I guess, from that subject into what you're doing now.
Yes. So I was interested in international human rights partly because I wanted to spend time outside of the United States and to broaden my perspective. And the human rights program was strong at Yale. And so that kind of afforded me those opportunities. I think there were also ways in which I saw the world in very black and white terms, and I think international human rights abuses are often very very black and white,
Right. Yeah.
wrong and right, as the case might be. Of course, then you start to get deeper into the issue, spend time in these places, and you realize, maybe it's not so cut and dried after all. So, for example, I spent time in Pakistan after there was a military takeover, and it was really interesting to me because I think, coming from my experience as a Midwesterner in the United States, the idea of a military takeover was something that was very concerning to me, and still is in many ways. But there were interesting ways in which the military there was actually, in some ways, better for human rights, particularly in terms of treatment of women and religious minorities, than was arguably the case under a democratically elected regime. So I
Mhm.
really, again, started to, you start to spend time with people and you see the complexities of these issues. More specifically, how this led to my interest in environmental issues is I was based in Bangkok, and ended up working in northeastern Thailand along the border with Laos. And there are a number of hydroelectric power projects there. And I saw firsthand how the farmers and fishers were displaced from the land and from the rivers on which they had fished, and the ecological damage from these projects. And so I realized that what had been largely an interest in civil and political rights really had to be seen in these broader economic, social, cultural kind of frameworks
Mhm.
as well. And I guess the other thing I would just say, the reason I'm interested in like energy and environmental issues is because I feel like it combines a bunch of these different interests, right? I can combine my interest and experience in banking and finance and consulting, so I understand how businesses think about these issues,
Right.
but I also sort of say like, oh, okay, this is how the regulator thinks about this, and this is the impact on communities, right? The environmental justice perspective. And so I like the fact that I can combine several different interests into this particular line of work.
Yeah, so I'm sure that that's very valuable for your students to be able to hear like so many different sides of the issues that you guys are working on. And I would love to just hear a little bit more about what that work entails. I mean, like in a normal day or a normal week, if such a thing exists for you, what kind of work are you doing, both as a teacher and as a lawyer?
Yeah, so maybe I can just give an example of one of our projects. So we are actually working in Michigan, and we're representing a couple of different groups there. One of which is based in a community that's just part of the larger kind of Detroit metropolitan area. This group is a grassroots organization that has been promoting energy democracy, energy independence, and energy sovereignty. And what happened was that the electric monopoly, DTE, removed approximately 1,000 streetlights from this community. This is a community comprised largely of low-income individuals, primarily Black and Brown community, and this was certainly kind of counterproductive to the community's well-being to have the 1,000 streetlights removed. So this organization started installing solar streetlights. We started working with them to represent their interests and concerns before an organization called the Michigan Public Service Commission. That is a state body that regulates electric utilities in Michigan. And there are public service commissions or public utilities commissions in every state across the country. What we did in these so basically the way it works is that before a utility raises rates, it has to go and get approval from the commission. They also have to present kind of their long-term plans in terms of how they're going to meet the demand of different customers for energy. And so there's a whole process by which groups that are interested in the outcome of these cases can get involved in these legal cases. And so we have represented this group called Solidarity in almost 10 different cases over the past 5 years before the Michigan Public Service Commission. And we've been able to secure some progress to bring community solar to the community, to push back on some of the rate hikes, to fight for more rooftop solar, better reliability, et cetera, for this community. And this is really the first time that an organization that's comprised of primarily low income individuals, Black and Brown individuals, has had their voice represented before the commission. So in terms of the day-to-day work, that means reviewing these requests from the company or proposals from the company, which can be in the thousands of pages. We are able to ask the company questions that they have to reply to, called discovery. I was just editing a set of discovery requests that my students were working on just before we hopped on this. We work with witnesses. So we help them develop what's called testimony, where they explain their background and their expertise and what issues or problems typically they have with the company's proposals. We then marshal all of that evidence we get from the company, from our experts, and put together a written brief that can be 40 to 100 pages in length and file that with the commission. They're also cross-examining witnesses. So the company has to put its witnesses on the stand. And so a couple of weeks ago, we had a student who did a 2.5-hour examination of one of the company witnesses, really just kind of marching through all of the holes, so to speak, in their presentation. So, and then there can be settlement discussions taking place in the background as well. So it's just a lot of different research skills, writing skills, oral advocacy skills that I'm coaching the students on doing every day.
Yeah, that is so interesting, and that must be such an interesting experience for the students. I was going to ask a little bit about like how that team functioned, and I was going to say, is it kind of like you're the lead counsel and they're, the other members of the team? But it sounds like a lot of the work that they're doing is, I mean, it sounds like they're basically practicing.
Yeah, I mean, they are, and literally they are practicing, because the rules by which they can make formal appearances, that would be kind of an appearance would be a term of art, and so the students are doing the work. I mean, they are arguing a motion, right? It's called a motion is when you ask the court to do something. So you move the court to compel the company to provide certain information that they have not provided and that they're legally required to provide. So in other work that we've done, we've had students argue that kind of a motion before a judge. We've had other students kind of take the lead on negotiating with opposing counsel over, detailed terms of a settlement or over a protective order in terms of how we're going to keep information confidential. And practically speaking, the way we work is we have teams of typically 3 to 5 students, and a more senior student ends up being kind of the team lead. So we have a student now who's the team lead who's been enrolled in the clinic for more than a year and a half. And, I jokingly refer to her as the boss because she is the boss. I say, okay, what's our agenda today in our meeting? What do you need? What do you need input from me on so that you can go do that work that for our clients? So it's really putting them in role as much as possible.
I'm glad to hear that. I have one more question that I did want to ask, and it's funny. Like we have been asking, similar questions to your colleagues, and some people, I think, they really want to continue on the track that they've been on, and researching, similar things and stay in a similar position. But as someone who has jumped around so much and who has like evolved so much, is there something that you think you would be doing if you weren't in this role right now? Are there areas that you are, looking at and thinking maybe one day I'm going to move into that?
That's a great question. One of the things I really like about this job is the freedom and flexibility to pick my clients and the kinds of cases that I want to work on, and the support of an incredible institution like the University of Chicago, right? Yeah. For this work. So my interests have evolved over time. Where I think we can be impactful has evolved over time. My understanding of what are good experiences for students have evolved, and that will continue to be the case, right? As the world changes, as I hope we continue to make progress on environmental justice issues and the clean energy transition and climate change. And so this is a great platform from which to be able to pick specific projects to achieve all of those objectives. Mm-hmm. And sure, every now and then I toy with the idea, I could be a clean energy investor, and wouldn't that be cool? Or, if I went back into government again, here are all the things I would do. Right. And I'm not saying I would, completely rule out those possibilities, but I am very satisfied and very fulfilled and think that I can continue to be very impactful for the rest of my career by doing largely what I'm doing right now.
Very cool. Well, my last question is just what advice would you give to someone who was considering, either moving into environmental law or just sort of going into law in general, or who wanted to someday be a law professor? What would you say?
So I think that it's really important when people think about, what do they kind of want to do, that they pursue kind of as quickly as possible, the opportunities as closest to what they think they want to do, right? I think that at a lot of institutions, people are encouraged to keep their options open. And on the one hand, it's great to keep your options open. On the other hand, if you know that you are interested in working in environmental justice communities on renewable energy development, you should just go do that. Because if you don't like it, then better to find that out now, as opposed to a detour of several years to then end up there and be like, I didn't really like that after all. And you also figure out like what do you like about it, and so you can stick with it or kind of move to the next thing that's going to be closer to your interests as well. I think and once you kind of find your niche, it's great because then you develop expertise. You get to know people. People know that you're an expert. That generates more opportunities. And so it's kind of interesting. It's like, in some ways by narrowing, it actually gives you the solid foundation from which you can kind of go broad, almost like a tree, I guess, as I think about it now. It's like, if you've kind of got, put your root down, then you can kind of, your place, then you can kind of, grow out your base and grow out from that as well. Try planting yourself as close to where you think you want to be as early as possible.
Yeah, and see where you branch out from there.
Yeah, and I guess the only other thing I would just say is that serendipity is and just staying in touch with people. I think every single opportunity, or almost every single opportunity that has ever come to me, it's been brought to my attention by kind of someone who knew about the opportunity. They may have been at that organization. They knew someone who was looking for someone. Being open to people and open to new opportunities, and they will come.
Well, okay, so I'm gonna end on a question about what you find most gratifying about this, and I say that first because my next question is, what don't you enjoy about your current position? Is there anything that is just not fun about this to you? Anything that you would like to sort of just remove from your duties?
Yeah. So I'll start with the fun, I guess. So the fun is that I get to like wear multiple hats, right? So I get to be based in academia at a great institution, like research institution like the University of Chicago, and have these incredible colleagues who are very thoughtful and just know so much about the past and the way things should be in the future. Um, I also have this kind of foot in the real world where we're trying to have real impact for real clients. And I get to work closely with students who are really excited about these projects, really excited about representing these communities, really excited about bringing the benefits of the energy transition to these communities, which have been, gotten a lot of the burdens, environmental burdens and energy burdens over time, but not so many of the benefits. So they love this kind of work. And I love seeing how they develop over time. Those are some of the joys of this work. I think the challenge of the work is that I'm trying to optimize for both the clients to make sure that they're getting the best representation that they can possibly get,
Mhm.
and to make sure that the student experience is optimized as well.
Right.
And so it generally works really well together, but that involves a lot of planning and a lot of iterations.
Yeah.
No, it's just different from practice, right? If I was
Sure.
just practicing, I could just sit down and write something, probably get feedback from a client, and then revise it and then file it. Right? We are doing multiple revisions over much longer periods of time, but that's where the learning takes place. And so that's what's great about it. We just have to be sure that we're kind of building that all in. And also, client selection and buy-in is really important as well. And that's what we have. I mean, over the past 10 years, we've been able to develop this incredible group of clients who are also invested in developing the students at the same time that we're all working together to achieve their objectives. So there's a lot of like paddling underneath the water to make
Right.
sure that things look as smooth as they do otherwise. And I think the only other thing I would say, it's the nature of the job. I mean, it is so exciting to see these students develop, and I'm so proud of them going out into the real world. But then I start again with the next crop of students, and
Yeah.
so it's just it's an inherently kind of concentrated period in their lives, and it's great. I feel very lucky and honored to be able to have this position.
Yeah, well, it's been fascinating to hear about your career path and the various opportunities and the various ways that you've branched out. So, thank you so much for sharing all this with us. It's been a pleasure. Course takers, if you enjoyed listening to today's interview, please check out the other episodes of our podcast. You can find out more about the University of Chicago through uchicago.edu or the university's campus in Hong Kong through uchicago.hk. See you around.